see. 1, 2, 3. Oh, happy birthday! Let's see. Are we missing anyone? Andrew, do you know if? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10.
I can double check. Jim just sent out.
I know Jim told me that there would be 10, but then there was someone who couldn't make it last night. So tentatively there was supposed to be 11. Let's see. We'll give it 1 more minute. I'm so impressed. You guys are all here at 9, and everyone last night was like right on time. I'm like, wow, in Michigan, they're much more prompt than the people in Washington, D.C. So don't get too excited, but 2 of you will leave with prizes.
Stacking stuff.
I hope there's not going to be a quiz, though. It's a little early for that.
There's a little game, but it's towards the end, so you'll be awake by then, hopefully. Well, do it because I want to get you in and out as quickly as possible, because I know this is the last place you want to be. Let's go ahead and get started. And let's see, did you receive a handout?
No, I didn't.
Okay, sorry about that. Welcome. Let's see, let me connect this really quick.
Are you the backup of the backup?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you guys have heard of the Beckett Fund?
Impressive.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
she's not the Beckett.
No, we're thinking of Beckett and Brader, isn't
Beckett and Rader.
so yeah, a little bit.
No, there's, go ahead.
Yeah, so the Beckett Fund, well, let's see, my remote is not working right now. The Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, if you've heard the name, we handled the Hobby Lobby Supreme Court case, the Little Sisters of the Poor Supreme Court case, if those sound familiar, Holt v. Hobbs, which was a Muslim prisoner Supreme Court case, Hosanna Tabor, which was another Supreme Court case. All day, every day, the Beckett Fund does religious liberty on behalf of all faiths. So from Anglicans to Zoroastrians and everyone in between, Mormons, Muslims, Mennonites, that we believe that everyone has the fundamental right to practice their faith, live according to their faith. And so, yeah, we're the only law firm in the world that represents religious liberty for all. It's really fun. Really, really diverse. Sometimes I find myself like at Native American powwows, and then the next day I find myself in a prison, prison inmates.
What did you do?
Just one of our clients. As a funny side note, it was a whole bunch of inmates. They had just gotten out. They were in this transition house, and I needed to take some pictures. And I was like, all right, I just need to do some headshots of you guys. And they're like, yo, Emily, you know headshot means something different to us, right? I'm like, oh, right, okay. Anyway, just to brag about the Beckett Fund for a second. I've been with the Beckett Fund for 5 years. We've had 5 Supreme Court cases in the past 4 years. We have a 91% win rate, and 3 of our cases at the Supreme Court were 9-0 rulings. And again, all day, every day at the Beckett Fund, it is religious liberty. I'm an attorney. Like I said, I've been with the Beckett Fund for 5 years. And for some reason, that remote is not working. So, there are 2 laws in the religious liberty world that are the bread and butter of religious liberty. You have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and you have the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act, and their sister statutes, which we'll learn about. So all day, every day, for all the cases that we work on, it's either a RFRA or a RLUIPA. And so it's kind of, at the Beckett Fund, we live and breathe these two laws. And when Jim called and asked if I would be willing to do this training, I was actually really excited because it gave me an opportunity to really dig into a lot of like the current scholarship on it, and a lot of, I like ordered all these books and like read all these books, and it was really fun. And I put a lot of time and thought into this, and hopefully this is a very helpful and thoughtful presentation for you. This isn't just a stock presentation that I just had, but really tried to break it down into something very useful and helpful, and also make it very efficient. Because like I said, I know this is the last place that you want to be. So, quick overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the history and purpose of RLUIPA, because for me, if I don't understand the why of a law, or the why of what I'm doing, it's really hard for me to deal with the what of it. So we're going to look at the bigger picture of where this law came from and what its purpose is. Then we're going to dig into the law itself and go through the main provisions and how those provisions apply to you as a town board. Then we're going to hit on the 5 top requirements of RLUIPA and go over examples of what those mean. And then we're going to have a game time. And we're going to play Guess the Violation with a number of case studies where you can guess which of the 5 requirements of RLUIPA that is violating. And then we're going to hit on practical takeaways. And we will take it from there. All right. So, history of RLUIPA. So, since the dawn of time, the founders, they talk about inalienable rights. And so since, the beginning of man, when man was here, the founders believed they were endowed with certain inalienable rights. And one of those was the ability to seek truth, embrace truth, and live according to that truth. And that belief that religious liberty was a fundamental human right was then enshrined in the First Amendment. And it was listed as the first freedom because the founders believed that all other freedoms rest on humans' ability to, like I said, seek that truth and live according to that truth, whether it led people to God or no God at all. That pursuit is what makes us human, which separates us, that ability to seek and live according to that truth. So, enshrined in the First Amendment, and so it goes along. And then in '63, it was given a little bit more legal teeth of what that means to have no establishment of religion and free exercise of religion. Because those are beautiful phrases, but what do they mean when it comes to the law itself? So in Sherbert, there was a standard called the strict scrutiny standard that was set for religious cases that said, all right, government, if you are going to burden somebody's religion, you have to have a compelling reason to do so, and you have to accomplish that compelling reason by the least restrictive means possible. So even if you have a compelling reason, if you can achieve your compelling goal any other way than burdening somebody's religion, you have to go that route. And that was the Sherbert standard. Then in 1990, the court came along and swept that out and said, as long as the law is generally applicable, it's fine. Well, that made a lot of people mad. In fact, it made almost every single person in Congress upset. And so the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was signed. Interesting, it was co-sponsored by Senator Hatch and Senator Kennedy, which polar opposites on the political spectrum. You can't get any further. And they co-sponsored it. And then it was signed by President Clinton. It was passed unanimously in the House. And, there's them signing it, very happy. But along a few years later, a case came up called Bernie v. Flores that challenged it on federalism grounds, said, all right, government, that can be your standard, but we don't think you have the ability to force the states to comply with RFRA. And the court agreed and said, you're right, the federal government, this is your standard for any federal government action, but there's a thing called federalism, so let's stick with that. So then, in 2000, the same motley crew went out again and said, all right, well, we can't make it apply to the states in all things, but we can make it apply if there is a land use regulation, because we have the right to regulate land via interstate commerce, and we also have the right to regulate prisons or anyone who receives federal funds. So based on that jurisdictional hook, they passed RLUIPA, which then applied it to the states, once again, on those specific issues. And then in 2005, it went up to the Supreme Court, and at least the prisoner provision of RLUIPA was held as constitutional, and it's most likely the land use with all the cases as they've gone now would also survive scrutiny at the Supreme Court. All right, so that's the history. It's got full history on RLUIPA. You know more than 99.9% of the rest of the world on this law. All right, so why does it matter? Well, I'm going to show you this short clip, which we just celebrated the 25th year of the passing of RFRA, which was a really big deal. And so working with a diverse group of coalitions, we wanted to kind of show who had benefited from RLUIPA and RFRA, who were the faces of people who have been protected by this law. And so the Becket Fund, like I said, we represent people of all faiths. So we called up some of our clients, worked with other organizations. So we worked with really diverse groups to pull together this short story. So, and like I said, feel free to get drinks, eat
it's
some
like
granola
them
bars.
going into the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church and cutting their altar.
The entire religious community understood if they can do this to Western Presbyterian Church, they can do this to us at First Baptist or at Temple Sinai or any place else.
70% of people don't know who a Sikh is.
I was even told at one time, you know, well, that's what happens when you have the wrong religion.
My name is Wilbur Slockish Jr.
Chief Johnny Jackson.
My name is Rabbi David Goldstein.
Scott Greenberg.
My name is John Wimberly.
My name is Jasjit Singh.
I am Chief Klickitat tribe.
I'm the Cascade Chief on the Columbia River.
For 15 years, I've been involved with chaplaincy for the state of Texas, and for the last 6 years, I have been the head consulting rabbi.
I'm a former inmate, Texas Department of Criminal Justice.
And I'm the former pastor of Western Presbyterian Church.
I'm the Executive Director of the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, SALDA.
This religion of the native people doesn't take place in what looks like a physical building, a church. It is outside. It could be under a canopy of old growth trees. It could be in a meadow.
One of the most famous passages in Scripture is Matthew 25, where one of the lines is, I was hungry and you didn't feed me, or I was hungry and you fed me.
Sikh Americans have been in this country for over 100 years. We believe in one God, sharing your earnings, and earning your livelihood through honest means. Our unique articles of faith, including the turban and beard, represent our commitment to justice, service, equality, and religious freedom.
Our program is a rehabilitation program where we use religion as rehabilitation for the inmates by giving them spirituality and giving them hope for the future and giving them like the tools of how to deal with society once they get out.
You know, in this country, there's been a history of otherizing. There's been a history of xenophobia, a fear of what's different and what's not understood. And, you know, in particular, post 9/11, there's really been this racialization of religious identity. So for Sikh Americans in particular, the turban and beard, though it represents to us privately compassion, justice, service, many American ideals, publicly, they've come to mean very different things. We had a situation in Texas where a Sikh American man was told by a judge that he would have to remove his turban before he came into his courtroom. That's a very real situation where a Sikh cannot fully function in society and seek justice under the law when they're not able to wear their articles of faith.
The battle was really around their fears of the homeless versus our assurances that we have been feeding these people, we know these people, we consider them to be our friends, and we have a religious commandment that tells us we have to be responsible for them. And so we're not going to drop that responsibility just because we're moving into a new building. The whole world was watching this thing. And you knew that there were other communities out there who were going, if they can shut down Miriam's Kitchen at Western Presbyterian Church, maybe we can shut down that program in our neighborhood that we don't like. the neighbors had already talked to the police chief and said, you know, if they open that and they don't have legal protection, you have to enforce the law. And the chief of police, bless him, at the time said, I don't want to put these people in jail because I think what they're doing is right. He says, but if that's what the law is, my job is to enforce the law, and I will arrest them.
They were standing in this burial ground that was now destroyed. No one said a thing. Their silence, that's for me, said everything.
It's like one of the biggest laws you could ever break is by going and disturbing somebody that's been laid to rest.
Because to them it's just a piece of land with a superstition fallen over it. That's the misunderstanding that they look at us with.
To me, it's like them going into the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church and cutting their altar.
I remember a time when there was no Jewish services. You were just pretty much stuck out. You know, you were the odd man out. One time I was on a unit that had 5,000 people, and I was the only practicing Jew. So I requested to be transferred to a unit that had Jewish services. And every time I was met with opposition, and I was even told at one time, you know, well, that's what happens when you have the wrong religion.
The body is in jail. The soul is not in jail. The soul needs to be healthy, and if the soul is healthy, eventually the body can become healthy. And that's why we need to protect their rights. If they're ever going to be rehabilitated, if there's ever going to be a difference, we need to start with their souls.
RIFRA means that, myself, my brothers, my sisters, my mom, my dad, we can all participate in American life in the way that we had dreamed. And really the way that it's promised as written out in the Constitution. We have an opportunity to get jobs and to fully integrate within American society without having to compromise or sacrifice any part of our religious identity.
And he said nobody would expect to control the worship of Western Presbyterian Church in terms of its worship and its sanctuary, and nobody should be able to control its worship in terms of its service of neighbors, in this case, the homeless. If RIFRA did not exist, Miriam's Kitchen would not exist. There's no question about that. And many other ministries would not exist because congregations would be afraid to open them because they would know about our case, and knowing about our case, they go, well, it's already been proven that you can't do that, that neighbors can come in and tell you what to do, so we're not even going to start it.
The people are still there who passed on in that area. They need to be protected. And it's our job as Native people, as long as we stand, we have to protect that. Because one day when we're gone, we're going to be asked by the Creator, why didn't we do that if we knew and understood it?
This matzah has been brought to you by Chabad Outreach Jewish Inmate Services. What the case has accomplished so far is a settlement in which the state has opened at least one kosher kitchen in the state of Texas, and that kosher kitchen has evolved into an enhanced Jewish program which has provided the needs of the inmates on many different levels, and that has helped them to retransition and to go out into the world and to become members within the community.
And through meeting Rabbi Goldstein and the Jewish Enhanced Program and the Max Masada case, today I'm a better person. Through religion, I've been able to rehabilitate myself. I'm very proud to say that.
All right. So for me, understanding, again, both the faces of the people that these laws have helped and then understanding the historical context makes it easier. So, all right, quiz time. I'm going to throw these in the middle, and if you get one right, here for one. I roll those, and so, all right. So, what does RLUIPA, is the first person to raise their hand and answer, what does RLUIPA stand for? And you can cheat. It's right there on the it's right there on the front of your paper.
Religious Land Use Institutional Persons Act.
Ding, ding. All right. All right. What was the statute? What was the law pre-RLUIPA? Good. Awesome.
What was that? There you go.
By what margin was both RFRA and RLUIPA passed in the House?
Unanimous, weren't they?
Yeah. Good job. Good job. And, okay, this is a harder question. What was the case that then spurred RLUIPA? So what was the case called that said RFRA wasn't going to apply to the states? That was a trick question because we went over it really fast. Bernie versus Flores. That's not critically important. Just like I said, most question. You can get a candy just for thinking about it. All right. Oh, it's your birthday. That's right. All right. So, in this handout, what we have here is I have for you the entire text of the law. And don't worry, we are not going to read the entire text of the law line by line because that would be very, very boring and very painful. How we're going to break this down is I'm going to go through the top provisions of the law and go through how the courts have interpreted it. Because as you know, dealing with laws, the text can say one thing, but courts can say it means another thing. So just want everyone to be on the same page of what it currently means. So I will read this one though, because this should sound familiar to you. So this is section 2. So this is the very first part of the law. No government shall impose or implement a land use regulation in a manner that imposes a substantial burden on the religious exercise of a person, including religious assembly or institution, unless the government demonstrates that the imposition of the burden on that person, assembly, or institution is in furtherance of a compelling government interest and is the least restrictive means of furthering that compelling government interest. Sound familiar? The strict scrutiny standard. There it is again. Coming back. All right, so there's a number of things in here. It's like, well, all right, what exactly does person mean? How do we define person or religious assembly or institution? What is exactly a religious exercise? What counts as religious exercise? What is compelling interest? What's least restrictive means? So, and who is defined in the government in this? All right, so who is bound by RLUIPA? So the courts have defined, and just a FYI, that the answers to all these questions are starting on page 8. The answers to all these questions. I won't make you go back and forth to reference them. I just want to point out that you will have the answers to all these questions in this packet as a reference that you can call upon anytime you're just like, I just want to learn more about RLUIPA. just want to remember. So that is there. So, all right, so what does government mean according to RLUIPA? Well, here, as applied to you guys, it applies to city councils, planning boards, zoning appeals, counties, municipalities, villages, towns, and cities, and people in the state. So that is how government is defined by RLUIPA. All right, so what does land use regulation mean? Land use regulation means here laws that determine the type of building or land that can be located on what areas and under what conditions. Sound familiar? I.e., what you guys do all day, every day, right? Or landmark preservation. What it does not include, so RFRA does not cover or preempt fire codes, ordinances requiring use of sewer connections, property taxes, landlord tenant laws, or laws governing trespass and others. So, this is not part of RLUIPA, this is part of RLUIPA. All right, so what does religious exercise of a person, religious assembly, or institution mean? So, courts have applied RLUIPA to houses of worship, prayer meetings in homes, religious schools, religious retreat centers, faith-based shelters, soup kitchens, group homes, and other social services. And again, also applies to the buildings, the halls, the rooms that are used for meetings as an extension of religious exercise of a person. Oh, also construction projects. All right, this is a other interesting point in the law that's in the text. What does religious exercise mean? It continues and says, any exercise of religion, whether or not it is compelled or central to the religious belief. And so, for example, we couldn't claim that on the Wednesday prayer meeting was less critical to one's faith than the Sunday prayer meeting. According to RLUIPA, religious exercise is religious exercise. So whether or not it's central to the religious belief or not. All right, so remember when I said when the case Bernie v. Flores got brought up to the Supreme Court, I said, hey, government, you don't have the jurisdictional hook to make states apply. So in scope of application right here in section 2, this is where they get their jurisdictional hook that we talked about. That this will apply to if you receive federal funds, any land use regulation, in prisons, or anytime there is an individual assessment being made, or commerce with foreign nations or Indian tribes. So that is how they got that. So what does substantial mean? Substantial burden mean as applied to RLUIPA? Anytime there's application for variance, special use permits, exceptions, or zoning requests, conditional use, zoning appeals, or if it regulates interstate commerce, construction, or federal funding, like we talked about. So, again, I think all day, every day, you guys are dealing with, having to deal with all these issues. So just know that RLUIPA applies to all these things as according to the standard of RLUIPA. So this is kind of the meat of the law. There are 5 main things that RLUIPA does. So it has the substantial burden analysis. Then it has equal terms. So no government shall impose or implement a regulation that treats religious assemblies on worse terms than non-religious assemblies. So equal terms. Then we have non-discrimination, that governments can't discriminate against religions. And then also, no government can totally exclude religions in an area, and they can't put unreasonable limits on religious assemblies, institutions, or structures within a jurisdiction. So those are 5. We'll come back. Like I said, this is the meat of RLUIPA. We'll come back and we'll give examples of this, and then the game that we're going to play is name the violation. So it will be one of these 5. All right, so in section 5 of the handout, you'll kind of see that this is varied. So a lot of towns actually don't know. So this is on page number 4. So Section 5, Paragraph E, government discretion. Like I said, a lot of people don't focus on this, and this is actually a huge benefit to town boards. As you know, any litigation can be very, very expensive, and lots of times cities and towns just aren't aware of RLUIPA, and so this safe harbor, this is what's called the safe harbor provision. The safe harbor provision says, let's say a permit gets denied, then it's brought to the attention, oh, this is actually a violation of RLUIPA. If the city goes ahead and comes into compliance with the RLUIPA, then that settles the claim and litigation wouldn't continue, which, again, is why it's called the safe harbor provision. Whereas in other laws, even after something is amended, there can still be damages, there can still be claims, the lawsuits can still go forward, and that's not the case here with the safe harbor provision. All right. So, other questions that apply to RLUIPA. Does this exempt religious assemblies from zoning laws? What do you think? Yes? No? No, you're right. They still have to comply. There was a case where a school, they wanted to turn a hospital into a church, and they didn't go through the process, and they said, hey, RLUIPA, we don't have to go through this process, and the judge is like, no, yes you do. This does not exempt you from going through the normal laws. Instead, what RLUIPA does is it provides safeguards for religious institutions. It does not exempt them. Can a place of worship still be landmarked? Yes it can. It just has to fall under the same analysis of making sure it doesn't hit one of those 5 considerations of RLUIPA, that it's not a substantial burden, and if it is a substantial burden, that there's a compelling government interest applied with the least restrictive means possible, and making sure it wasn't a discrimination, and making sure it's on equal terms, and that it's not excessive limits or restrictions. All right, what about eminent domain? Does eminent domain apply to RLUIPA? No, eminent domain is something different, and so there have been a few cases where towns have used eminent domain kind of as a guise to still get what they want from the churches, and in those cases the court has said you're still violating the religious rights. But generally speaking, eminent domain does not apply to
the case with the tribe though, was that the eminent domain? The case
in North Dakota?
Mm-hmm. The one on the video, wasn't that eminent domain?
Yes, so that was a RFRA. It was a RFRA claim that they violated a number of things there when they didn't consult with the tribe, and they were trying to use eminent domain, but they had violated all sorts of other provisions.
That wasn't a RLUIPA case, that was a
Ever, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To clarify, it was a federal highway probably being
It was a
built?
federal highway, yeah.
So a little bit of a different
Yeah.
category of analysis from the eminent domain applying to land use.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because it was a federal action that was under, it started actually under the Bush administration where they built a highway over their sacred lands. Yeah, really sad, but.
Not to.
Yeah.
But that federal highway, was
Yeah.
that road, did the road exist already in those
No.
lands, and then they wanted to widen it?
Oh yes. So they wanted to widen it, and what it did is it then destroyed all this sacred burial ground. So there was a very small, non-busy highway that went through the lands.
So they wanted to widen it
They wanted to, yes, widen the right of way, and then also expand significant. I think they turned it into 2 lanes. And one of the big problems in that case is there was this alcove that was like their most sacred inner sanctuary, and basically you had to be a member of the tribe to be on that land because it was federal land. So this road came and built right up against that inner sanctuary, and so all of a sudden to them what was their temple was destroyed. It's very sad. All right, quiz time. Again, for the candy. All right, true or false? That RLUIPA applies to fire codes.
No.
Good. Can a house of worship still be landmarked? All right. let's see. Name one of the top 5 provisions of RLUIPA, of the 5 that we talked about. They said we're the meat of RLUIPA. Yeah, good. Someone else name another one. Yeah, good. Who does RLUIPA apply to? Yep, good. Give me an example of what constitutes religious exercise. So we went over a list of religious exercise of how courts have applied RLUIPA. And some of them involve like soup kitchens, houses of worship.
Homeless shelters.
Yeah, homeless shelters. Yep, good. You get some candy?
I'm gonna be on a sugar high.
Well, you can save it. You don't have to eat it all now. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yeah.
Does the law really, or has it been interpreted what really religion really is? I mean, most of what we determine in terms of religion is pretty understandable. Because it's identified with an established religious practice, no matter what it is. Where do you draw the line in terms of groups of people that claim something is the name of religion when it's, how do you know?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the test that they use is a sincerely held religious belief. It's the sincerely held religious belief standard. So it's not that a belief has to be reasonable or even practiced by a lot of people, but whether or not it's sincerely held. So, for example, sometimes there are prisoners to try and get away with different rules in prison will all of a sudden claim, oh, this is against my religion, you can't make me do this.
Right.
And so they look at like the history, like, well, how long have you practiced this? What do you do, daily to show that this is, very sincere in your heart? And it's interesting because one thing courts are not allowed to do is say whether or not it's a reasonable belief. They're not allowed to make that analysis. So it was interesting working on the Little Sisters of the Poor case. The government was initially trying to say, oh, this actually doesn't violate their religion. It doesn't violate their religion. Well, that's actually not for the government to say whether or not it violates their religion. That's for the sisters to say, these nuns who take care of the elderly poor, who believe that if they do what the government's asking them to do, they will be held accountable before God, and that it is a grave sin what they're being asked to do. And so the government quickly got smacked down on that, said, you're not, that's not your role. Oh yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, so the distinction is investigating whether a person sincerely holds a religious belief. That's actually it sounds kind of like a tricky question for a court to look into. It's actually the kind of question that courts look at all the time, or juries look at all the time.
With fraud.
Yeah,
Yep.
intent is something that, or even in criminal cases, there's an element of every crime, what the intent of the person was. It's not the same thing as looking at what the quality of the religion, what the religion itself actually requires. When courts have historically gotten into, what does the Bible actually say about the Presbyterian form of governance? It's a problem. It doesn't end well, and so they don't do it.
Yeah.
It's different from asking, is this person being sincere in asserting this religious claim? Not, is this a good religious claim? Does this make sense internally or externally?
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that. I really appreciate that. I'm spot on. The other thing is, so what about the flying spaghetti monster religion? That's set up to mock, the flying spaghetti monster nativity display that they try and set up, and they're like, oh, this is our religion. So there's an analysis for what qualifies as a religion, and it has to seek the transcendent. That is one of the things that because why there's religious protection is if there is something higher that you seek than the state, then you have to be able to have that room to breathe and practice that faith in order to be able to seek the transcendent as part of a religious belief. Does that make sense?
Is that evolving as a result of case law, or is that
Uh-huh.
really, yeah, because it's not possible, it can't possibly
Yeah.
be codified in the law.
No, that's definitely
So it sounds like
case law.
this is still evolving, just like the courts handling of pornography.
Yes.
You know, it's like the famous
Right.
quote, you know, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Right. Well, and that's why that list, as you said, list, that soup kitchens, social services, that's not the actual text of what's here, but that's, of course, I've looked at it and like, oh, well, very clearly that is religious exercise. So great question. So.
Does it differentiate or recognize the difference between religion and a cult?
So again, that analysis of like, is it seeking the transcendent, and is it a sincerely held religious belief? And again, not in the text, but that's something that courts can look at. And also, that's also where the compelling interest standard, if there's something that a religion was doing, let's say they're like, hey, we're sacrificing babies, our religion is telling us to sacrifice babies. Well, the government clearly has a compelling reason, a compelling interest in stopping, like, the sacrifice of altar of babies. And the only way they can stop the killing of babies is by infringing upon that religious belief. And so in that case, that's where substantial burden comes in. So, religious liberty is not an absolute right. And as you see, like this whole context, anything in religious liberty falls under this strict scrutiny standard of substantial burden, compelling interest. So, all right. So here are the 5 requirements. Again, the strict scrutiny standard of substantial burden, equal terms, non-discrimination, total exclusion, unreasonable limits. And to remember these, I was looking at this last night. I was like, hey, sent you. Okay, sent you. You can remember those 5. Sent you. All right. All right. So what does substantial burden mean? We talked about it a little bit. According to RLUIPA, if you're effectively barring the use of a particular property for religious activity, imposing a great restriction, or creating significant delay, uncertainty, or expense in expanding a house of worship, religious school, or other religious facility, the courts have found all of these to be a substantial burden. So,
Can you go back? Just go back.
Yeah.
The last one, creating significant delay, uncertainty, or expense. One could argue that by our use process, it is a significant delay, regardless if you're, a synagogue, a church, whatever.
Yeah.
Is it the fact that you're treating one religion over another and the significant delay, uncertainty, or expense?
So it would be if you were making churches, like, all right, if you're 5 Guys, your process takes a week. If you are Church of Christ, your process takes a month. That is obviously a significant delay as applied to a religious group, that's discriminatingly applying the zoning laws. Great question. All right, these have been examples of burdens. So denial of a church construction permit due to onerous off-site parking requirements imposed by the city, a permit condition requiring a religious treat to operate as a bed and breakfast, a denial of a construction of a parish center, and we talked about these, converting a building or expansion of schools. So I want to give you examples of not a burden, very close to these. I want you to note the key differences here, though. All right, a church was denied the amount of off-street parking it would have preferred, but there were reasonable parking alternatives available. So not substantial burden. They would have liked it. There were other options. No burden. A religious high school wanted to operate a commercial gym in their church. Court said, no, that was not religious exercise. That is not a burden. A church was denied the ability to demolish part of their church and build a family life center. It ran into some zoning issues. That was not a substantial burden because they could have used the other side of the church that would have been equally good, just as favorable and just as suitable for the church, and not have come afoul of the zoning ordinances. So that was no burden there. All right, let's say a Jewish congregation has been meeting in various rented spaces that have proven inadequate for its growing membership. They are denied a special use permit. The only reason is given is we have enough houses of worship, we want more businesses. That is, I mean, this was an actual example. So,
Pretty honest.
right? Pretty facially discriminatory right there. So, all right, so we talked about compelling interests. So, you know, you're allowed to substantially burden a religion if there's a compelling reason and it's done in the least restrictive means. So, not compelling revenue generating, economic development, eliminating congestion, maybe compelling safety concerns related to health, safety, traffic. But just to note on this, that can be a compelling reason, but it can't just be cited, oh, we're going to deny this permit because of health and safety. You have to show for that particular street, for that particular area, why that is a concern. It can't just be a blanket health and safety. And then remembering least restrictive means, if there's a way to achieve that goal in any other way than burdening the religious institution, you have to choose that route. This is something that comes up all the time in our cases. In the Little Sisters of the Poor case, for example, not a Aruba case, but same standard, the government actually admitted it had a lot of different ways to accomplish the goal that they were trying to achieve, rather than making the Little Sisters do what they wanted the Little Sisters to do. And so right there, it's like, yes, they have a compelling interest in providing these services, but they can do it without making the Little Sisters do it. So government, you have to go that route. All right, so we have substantial burden, compelling government interest. Next, equal terms. Oh, all right. For example, a place of worship is denied a permit where clubs, auditoriums, assembly halls, community centers, senior citizen centers, civic clubs, and daycare centers, and other assemblies were permitted. This is a violation of equal terms when a church is treated more poorly or on different terms as any of these institutions. All right, so we have substantial burden, compelling government interest, least restrictive means, and equal terms. Then the next one is non-discrimination. So what does this mean? All right. Zoning permit is denied because town officials do not like members of a particular group or religion, or if for any other reason the applicant is denied a zoning permit, if it would have been given to them had they not been a part of that religion or part of that denomination, then that's a violation of discrimination. I mean, pretty easy, right? That's pretty clear. A Hindu congregation denied the permit even though they meet all the requirements. The town board is overheard saying, I don't like Hindus. All right, so substantial burden, compelling government interest, least restrictive means, so that's actually all under one. Equal terms, non-discrimination, total exclusion. All right, so if a town is seeking to preserve tax revenues, enacts a law that no new churches or houses of worship will be permitted, that is a violation of total exclusion. Or if there's a city or town where there are no locations where religious use are permitted, that is also a facial violation of total exclusion. So you can't totally exclude houses of worship or religious assemblies. Sorry, my clicker is a little slow. All right, so substantial burden, equal terms, non-discrimination, total exclusion, and oh man, sorry. I just want you to go through this list a lot. All right, what's after equal terms?
I'm going to make sure we get it.
Yeah, total exclusion. Last of all, unreasonable limits. So this is an example of unreasonable limits. A city has no zones that permits houses of worship. The only way a church may be built is by having an individual parcel rezoned, a process that takes several years and is extremely expensive. Or regulations effectively leave few sites for churches because of excessive frontage or spacing requirements. Or there's also steep and questionable expenses on the applicant to get the permits. Those are considered unreasonable limits. All right, so 5 requirements. Substantial burden. Compelling government interest. All right, equal term, what's next? What's the N?
Non-discrimination.
And the T? Oh.
Total exclusion.
All right, and last one?
Unreasonable.
Ooh, yeah. All right, we're gonna play Name the Violation. So you get candy when you get it right, And the two people who guess the most get to leave with the test dispensers. All right. A small Orthodox Jewish congregation sought to hold services in a home in a residential neighborhood in which the city permitted the operation of non-religious assemblies and institutions, including private schools, athletic clubs, and a consulate. This was critical to the congregation in order to be within walking distance of its members on the Sabbath. Name the violation. There's 2 here. Possibly 3. Or 5. So here, so it's allowing for private schools, athletic clubs, but not for a church. That violates. Starts with the E.
Eagle terms.
Yeah, good job. You guys all get candy. Eagle terms. And also here, it is crucial to the congregation for its Sabbath. That's substantial burden. That is substantially burdening their faith. All right. A city ordinance imposed special conditions on churches, including the church to obtain permission of 60% of its neighbors, which is not a requirement proposed by or imposed on non-religious assemblies.
Reasonable limits.
Unreasonable and equal terms. Booyah. Candy for both of you. Shia Muslim community denied building a new mosque. The facts include that it was a bias against Muslims, and similarly situated places of worship had been permitted. Discrimination? Yep, good job. All right, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is denied building a permit despite meeting all the requirements. The zoning administrator is overheard making disparaging remarks about the Mormons.
Non-discrimination.
Yep, good. All right, Lovely City is seeking to preserve tax revenues, so enacts a law that no new churches or other houses of worship will be permitted. Total exclusion. Good, yeah, guys, great job. All right, there's no zones that permit houses of worship. The only way Church of Mercy may be built is by having an individual parcel rezoned, which would take years and be extremely expensive. Substantial burden and? I heard. Yep, unreasonable. Yep, all right. I think, all right, yeah. I mean, you guys nailed it. All right. We have one more thing to talk about, and then we're done. We're almost there. I know, we were efficient. All right. So, oh wait, first, let's see. I think you won the pet. I don't know who.
I'll give it to credit.
Oh yeah, Ben.
No, they're
Halloween candy.
They're gonna fight over this though.
What do you think I come home with one, I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, so practical takeaways. So what does all this mean? Well, like I said, RLUIPA is a new law. Lots of people have never heard of it. Lots of town boards have never heard of it. And so, similar to when different EPA laws, come out or came out, working those EPA regulations into the paperwork process, into the approval process. So same thing here, working the RLUIPA requirements into your existing land use process. I mean, the number one practical takeaway, providing training for anyone who comes on. You can just give them this handout and say, read this, you'll become an expert. That's the number one recommendation for RLUIPA. Also, engaging with the religious community. That oftentimes, if we don't understand the religious means or the religious practice of people in our community, it's hard to anticipate maybe what they need. I mean, this isn't a RLUIPA example, but just a general example. I was up in New York City, and I asked this guy to take a picture of me and my husband, and he's like, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't push that button." And I was like, "You can't push that button." And then I realized, yeah, it's the Sabbath. And then he explained more to me. I'm like, it's the Sabbath. He can't push. It was Saturday. He can't push buttons on the Sabbath. He's an Orthodox Jew. And so that helped me in the future to understand more about the needs of Orthodox Jews And so same thing with people in your religious community, understanding their religious practice to anticipate their needs.
Emily,
Uh-huh.
if I could say, that's a really good example of why it's not the government that decides how important a religious practice is, or what, whether this is really a central thing. It seemed almost nobody could imagine it being a religious violation to simply push a button.
Right.
But to that man, it was critical enough that he was going to have this awkward conversation with a stranger about how he couldn't do it because of his religious practices. If he's sincere about it, he gets to say what's important to his religion.
Yeah.
It's not something the government delves into and determines, oh, this is just not a very big deal.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Great comment. Also D, so identifying areas of controversy in any current ordinances and amending them to come into compliance with RLUIPA. So just reviewing any procedures or practices. And then remember the safe harbor provision, that if something comes up, that you have that great safeguard as a town board of the safe harbor to avoid costly litigation. And that is, Mother Angelica, Becca Fund actually represents EWTN, which was founded by Mother Angelica. And I just, love the fist pump. So, all right, good job. We finished that in 55 minutes. Good job team. So I cannot take any of this candy with me back on the plane, so please take it. Take the checks next to the 2 drink. Oh, birthday boy, you get you get those, and yeah.
You had some in the presentation. You had a number of slides that had some really good examples.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
That is. Yep. That's it.
Okay.
It is the examples. Oh well, the name the violation part. Those examples were not there, but if you look starting on page number 6 and 7, you'll see examples given for, equal terms. There's an example discrimination. There's an example religious totally excluded. So there are those examples there. Also, then, if you go to page 8, starting with the full question and answer, there are examples in the question and answer as well. All right, with that,
Does anyone have a copy of that presentation?
Yes, so I gave it to Jim,
Okay.
so he has that. All right, I relinquish you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a safe trip back.
Yes, it's a long flight to California.